Number 1. The ERD stall. The tunnels that should not exist. The tunnel is 40 centimeters wide. You are on your stomach in the dark, your shoulders scraping both walls simultaneously, and the passage has been descending for 11 meters with no end visible. The air is completely still. There is no smell. There are no marks on the walls, no soot, no tool grooves, no scratches from someone who was here before you. There are no artifacts on the floor. There are no bones. There is nothing to explain what this tunnel is, what it was for, or why someone built it. And yet it was built, by hand, with iron tools. Sometime between the 9th and 13th centuries, in a region of Central Europe where more than 700 of these structures have been found, 700 tunnels. No documents, no purpose, no name in any medieval record. They are called Erdstalls, an old Bavarian dialect word with no clean translation. Earth tunnels, rock tunnels. The word describes what they are without approaching what they mean. They were first catalogued seriously in the early 20th century, and by 2015 the research group for Erdstall, led by archaeologist Ingrid Kame, had documented over 700 confirmed sites in Bavaria and Austria alone, with additional clusters appearing in Hungary, Ireland, Scotland, and France. The total number across Europe may exceed 3,000. None of them make functional sense. They are too narrow for storage. The passages average 40 to 70 centimeters in width. A grown adult fits only by exhaling and twisting. No cart, no barrel, no livestock could navigate them. They are too shallow for water. They do not align with known escape routes or fortification patterns. They do not connect to cellars or wells in any consistent way. The entrances are hidden, not reinforced, not doorwayed, simply concealed. The floors show no wear from repeated use. The walls show no lamp soot. These tunnels were not lived in, not worked in, not traveled through on any regular basis. What makes this specifically impossible is not just that we do not know their purpose. It is that whoever built them left no trace of purpose. A building without furniture at least leaves the shape of rooms. These tunnels leave nothing but the tunnels. In some, researchers have found a single narrow slip hole, a passage so tight that a human body, pressed flat, can barely squeeze through from one chamber to the next. These are called schlupfe, slip holes. They are architecturally deliberate. They are also physically inexplicable. They appear designed to prevent something from passing, or to require a specific act of submission to pass through. No one knows which. The mainstream explanation offered by most archaeologists is that Erdstalls were hiding places, refuges dug during periods of medieval instability where a family or a priest could conceal themselves during raids. It is the only explanation that requires no extraordinary claim. It does not hold. The tunnels are too narrow to shelter a family. Most have a single entrance with no alternative exit, which means anyone hiding inside is also trapped inside. The construction, which required coordinated labor across a massive geographic region, suggests not individual farmers digging for safety, but an organized, sustained building project. There is no equivalent hiding hole tradition in any other medieval culture, anywhere, that produced tunnels of this scale, this number, this consistency of design. Researchers who study Erdstalls professionally use the word ritual with deliberate caution. They mean we have eliminated every functional explanation and we are left with a category of human behavior that does not record itself. You may be above one right now. Bavaria, Austria, the Czech Republic, Scotland, Ireland, Erdstalls have been found beneath farmhouses, beneath church foundations, beneath village centers. Most are discovered when the ground collapses. The majority of sites are believed to be unexcavated. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of known Erdstall regions have produced anomalies in fields and under streets that have never been opened. Whoever built 700 tunnels in 9 centuries of European darkness built them to remain secret. They succeeded beyond any reasonable measure. And the question they leave, not who built them, but why, and whether they built them everywhere, is a question that does not close when you stop reading about it. But if the Erdstall tunnels are the mystery of purpose, the next entry is the mystery of forgetting, an entire underground city, used in 4 separate wars, and then erased from every map. Number 2. Naors, the city that disappeared underground. In the autumn of 1917, a group of Australian soldiers stationed near Amiens, France, crawled into a hillside opening and descended into a tunnel system that had no right to still exist. They carved their names into the walls, they drew regimental crests, They scratched the names of towns back home in New South Wales and Victoria into limestone that had been waiting underground for 700 years. They had no idea that other soldiers had been here before them. They had no idea that in 4 months German forces retreating from the Hindenburg Line would also shelter here. They had no idea that in the First World War, roughly 10,000 French civilians had hidden in these same passages for months at a stretch, eating, sleeping, and dying in the dark. And they had no idea that the entire complex, over 2,000 meters of tunnels connecting 300 chambers, capable of holding 3,000 people at once, had been completely unknown to the region's population until a local priest named Danicourt mapped it in 1887. The underground city of Naurs sits beneath what is now a quiet village in the Somme Valley. Its origins are documented to the 3rd century, but its main expansion occurred in the medieval period, between the 14th and 17th centuries, when communities of peasants fleeing the Hundred Years' War carved deeper, added new chambers, built hearths with vented chimneys, dug wells that reached the water table, and divided the space into distinct neighborhoods, not just rooms but quarters, each associated with a specific village above. The scale is documented, the contents are clear, and the question it raises is genuinely unanswerable. How does a city underground that sheltered thousands of people across multiple centuries disappear from local memory so completely that a priest in 1887 was the first person in living knowledge to map it? The chimneys that vented smoke from medieval hearths still open at the surface, invisible among the grass, designed to disperse rather than concentrate the smoke so no plume would betray the entrance. The well shafts reach the water table and still hold water. The room layouts follow a logic: larger chambers for communal gathering, smaller alcoves for families, narrow connective passages that a defender could seal. The people who built this were not improvising. They were designing a second city beneath the first. When Allied forces mapped the tunnels in 1917, they used the medieval chambers as command posts, storage depots, and dormitories. They found evidence of the civilian occupation: hooks in the walls, carved recesses for lamps, the outlines of sleeping shelves. They left their own layer of graffiti on top of it. The WWY graffiti at Naurs is now the most studied archaeological layer in the complex, because it was discovered first, and it was only after the full historical context was understood that researchers recognized the soldiers had been writing their names on walls that already held the names of people fleeing the Black Death. Underground archaeology moves slowly at Naurs. The 2019 excavation season identified new chambers beyond the mapped perimeter. The city may be larger than current surveys indicate. Its present-day implication is specific and uncomfortable. The Somme Valley, like most of northern France, has been built over, plowed, and modernized for a century. If Naurs was unknown until 1887, and if other underground refuges of similar scale were built by the same medieval communities under the same pressures, and the pressures were the same, the Hundred Years' War touched every corner of northern France, then Naurs is probably not singular. The geography that hid it hides it still in other locations. What was sealed underground is not always what was lost. Sometimes it is what was deliberately placed beyond memory, waiting to be reopened. The next tunnel on this list was not lost. It was found under the worst possible circumstances, by the most unlikely person. At the exact moment it had been forgotten long enough for 7 centuries of secrecy to almost hold forever. Number 3. The Templar Tunnel of Acre. The secret that ate a city. A woman in the Israeli port city of Akko noticed that her washing machine was draining slowly in 1994. When the plumber arrived and removed the floor panel to check the pipe, the floor gave way. Not the pipe, the floor. A section of stone that should have been solid foundation dropped into a void that should not have existed, and the plumber found himself looking down into a vaulted stone corridor, perfectly intact, lit by no light that had touched it in 7 centuries. The tunnel beneath her kitchen ran for 350 meters. It was 12 to 15 feet high. The stonework was Crusader. The construction dated to the 12th century. It ran from the fortress of the Knights Templar, the largest Crusader military order in the Levant, directly to the port. 350 meters of perfect secret. The Templars had built it, used it, and apparently taken its existence with them when they were expelled from Acre in 1291. For 700 years, the tunnels sat beneath an active city, under buildings, under streets, under the daily life of a port that never stopped operating. The Israel Antiquities Authority excavated and documented the full passage between 1994 and 1999. Archaeologist Eleazar Stern led the excavation. The tunnel is now open to visitors. What the excavation established is not in dispute. The construction is masterwork military engineering. The tunnel slopes slightly, allowing water drainage. The walls are load-bearing and have supported the weight of a city above them for 7 centuries without structural failure. There is a secondary side passage whose purpose has not been fully identified. The entrance at the Templar fortress end was sealed and concealed with such precision that it was invisible from inside the fortress itself, which means the Templars who built it did not want their own members to know where the exit was. That detail is the specific impossibility. This is not a tunnel whose location was forgotten over time. This is a tunnel built to be unknown from its first day of construction. The Knights Templar were one of the most powerful and most scrutinized organizations in medieval history. Their properties in Acre were documented by the papacy, by rival orders, by Crusader nobles, by Muslim observers. Not one surviving document mentions the tunnel. Not one. Either the documentation was suppressed or the tunnel was so successfully kept secret that not a single contemporary witness ever wrote about it. The Templars used Acre's port for the movement of vast quantities of wealth, tribute payments, war funds, the financial infrastructure of a century of crusade. The tunnel ran directly to the port. The connection is obvious. The documentation of what moved through the tunnel does not exist. Mainstream archaeology does not dispute the tunnel's existence, its date, or its construction quality. The open question, what it was used for, who knew about it, and whether similar undocumented Templar infrastructure exists in other former Crusader cities, remains entirely unresolved. Caesarea, Jaffa, Sidon, Tyre, and Tripoli all contained major Templar fortifications. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have been conducted at some of these sites. Anomalies have been found. None have been fully excavated. The woman whose washing machine started this investigation lives in a city where a 12th century military secret survived intact directly beneath her kitchen. The city above has no record of it. The city below preserved it perfectly. And every old city in the world sits on the same principle. What is underneath has not been fully counted. The next entry proves this at the scale of an entire capital. Prague. 900 years of people walking above tunnels the city cannot fully map. Number 4. The Prague Underground. The city that doesn't know itself. Prague's Old Town was built on top of Prague's Old Town. That is not a metaphor. In the 12th century, the city experienced repeated flooding from the Vltava River, and the medieval solution was direct. They raised the street level by 3 to 5 meters, buried the existing ground floors, and built new buildings on top of the old ones. The rooms that had been at street level became cellars. The cellars that had been below street level became deeper cellars. And the passages that had connected buildings at street level became a tunnel network now running through what should be solid urban foundation. By the 13th century, Prague had 2 cities, one visible, one under the first one's floor. The underground network has been mapped in sections since the 20th century. The current known extent covers over 4 kilometers of passage, but municipal engineers have stated publicly that the full network has never been comprehensively surveyed. Ground-penetrating radar has identified cavities beneath portions of the Old Town that do not connect to any known passage. Some of these may be natural geological voids. Some are almost certainly medieval construction. The distinction has not been established. The passages are not sewers. Prague built a separate and documented sewer system. The underground passages predate the sewer infrastructure by centuries and do not follow the same routes. They are not escape tunnels in any strategic sense. They do not terminate at city walls or gates. Some end in what appear to be deliberately sealed walls, construction that is categorically different from collapse or deterioration, deliberate blocking, at a date after the tunnel was already in use. Someone sealed them. The records of that sealing do not exist. A section of the network beneath Mala Strana, the lesser town quarter, contains a passage that passes through the foundations of a building that archaeological dating places earlier than any construction recorded for that district. The building beneath the building has not been identified. The passage runs through its basement and continues beyond it. The practical threat is concrete. Prague's water table has shifted measurably since the medieval period as a result of construction, modern infrastructure, and climate variation. Some of the medieval passages in the Old Town are partially flooded in periods of high water. The intersection of an unmapped cavity with modern load-bearing foundations is not a theoretical risk. Since 25, 4 street collapses in Prague's historic center have opened onto voids larger than the surface damage suggested. In each case, the void was previously unrecorded. The city of Prague employs geotechnical surveyors whose specific function includes identifying subsurface risks in the historic center. They find new ones regularly. The rate of new discovery has not decreased. What makes Prague's underground specifically distinct from normal urban archaeology is the layer structure. Medieval builders knew they were building over older structures. In some passages, you can see 3 distinct phases of construction in a single wall: Romanesque stonework from the 10th century, Gothic modification from the 13th, and Baroque reinforcement from the 17th. Each generation building over and through the previous one, without fully knowing what the previous one had built. The current survey of the underground operates under the same condition. Prague does not yet know what is underneath what has already been found. The unknown city below the known city is not a historical metaphor in Prague. It is a geotechnical reality, actively monitored, never fully mapped. But if Prague's underground is the product of centuries of accidental accumulation, the next tunnel was built by one man's impossible commission, a single well that required solving an engineering problem no one had solved before. Number 5. The Well of San Patrizio. The Machine in the Mountain. In 1527, Pope Clement VII fled Rome during the sack of the city and installed himself in the hilltop town of Orvieto, in Umbria. Orvieto sits on a plateau of volcanic tufa, solid rock, 320 meters above the valley floor. It had essentially no accessible water supply beyond its cisterns, and those cisterns in a siege would last weeks. Clement commissioned the architect Antonio da Sangallo the Younger to solve a problem that had no precedent: build a water source that could survive an indefinite siege, accessible from inside the city walls, drawing water from a depth that no conventional well could manage. Sangallo's solution was not a well, it was a machine. The Well of San Patrizio descends 53 meters into the rock. It has 2 staircases, each forming a complete helical spiral, each wide enough for a laden donkey. The 2 spirals share the same central axis but never intersect. A donkey descends the outer spiral to the water, loads the water containers, and climbs back up the inner spiral to the surface. At no point in the system do the descending and ascending animals pass each other or share space. The entire operation, descent, loading, ascent, runs without interruption and without the collision that would otherwise make a single passage well inoperable under heavy use. The mechanics required to design 2 independent helical staircases cohabiting the same cylinder without intersection, within the constraint of hand-carved volcanic rock, and at a depth that required maintaining structural integrity across 53 meters of excavation, represent a level of spatial and structural calculation that formal engineering mathematics would not fully describe for another 2 centuries. The construction was completed in 1537. No surviving document explains Sangallo's design process. No drawings of the planning phase have been found. The finished well exists. The mathematics that preceded it does not. There is a second layer. Orvieto is not simply a hilltop town. The plateau itself is hollow. Below the medieval streets, over 1,200 underground spaces have been documented: carved chambers, tunnels, Etruscan cisterns, medieval cellars, pigeon houses, olive presses, and passages that are still being mapped by the Orvieto Underground Project, which has been conducting systematic surveys since the 1990s. The earliest carved spaces date to Etruscan occupation before Roman conquest. The most recent medieval additions date to the 16th century. The digging never stopped. The population of Orvieto at its medieval peak was approximately 15,000 people. The known underground space, if redistributed to the surface, would approximately double the city's footprint. Medieval Orvieto was effectively 2 equal cities, one exposed to the sky, one carved into the same rock beneath it. The Well of San Patrizio is the only documented example because Sangallo was famous enough to be credited. The unnamed Etruscan and medieval carvers who excavated the 1,000+ chambers below the city left no record of their names or their methods. Every medieval city built on elevated rock, and there are hundreds of them in Italy alone, sits on the same principle. The question is not whether the rock below was carved. It is how much, and by whom, and for what purpose that has outlasted every document that might have explained it. If Orvieto proves that medieval engineers built downward with the same ambition they built upward, Edinburgh proves that an entire community can simply be buried and forgotten under the city that replaced it. Number 6. Mary King's Close. The street that was buried alive. In 1753, The Edinburgh City Council awarded a contract to build the Royal Exchange, a formal trading hall intended to modernize the commercial heart of the city. The site selected was a block of tenements on the north side of the Royal Mile, in an area of densely packed medieval closes, the narrow alleyways that ran perpendicular to Edinburgh's main street. The plan was to demolish the existing structures and build fresh. The engineers discovered a problem. The closes had been built on a ridge with a severe downslope. Demolishing everything and leveling the ground would be enormously expensive. The alternative was cheaper and structurally sound. Seal the lower floors of the existing buildings, pour the foundation of the new exchange on top of the existing tenement walls, and use the sealed rooms and street level of the old closes as the foundation chambers of the new building. Mary King's Close, one of the oldest and most densely inhabited of the underground closes, was not demolished. It was buried. The families who lived there were cleared. The furniture stayed behind in many rooms. The fire grates, the internal walls, the well that served the close, these were not stripped out. They were simply sealed. In some rooms, objects were found by 19th-century explorers that had not been moved since the 1750s. A child's shoe, a ceramic bowl, wooden furniture, the outlines of a sleeping area still visible in the distribution of the surviving objects. The historical record of Mary King's Close as a living street ends in 1753. The archaeological record resumes in the 20th century. The close was partially accessed by Edinburgh Council workers during maintenance operations in the 19th century. Local legends of hauntings began accumulating in the Victorian period, when the deliberate sealing was understood imperfectly, and the narrative of a plague-sealed community, people locked inside during the 1645 outbreak, attached itself to the close, despite being historically inaccurate. The sealing was commercial and civic, not medical. The accurate story is in some ways more disturbing than the legend. The 1645 plague did devastate Mary King's Close. The population records show collapse and partial abandonment. The close was re-inhabited after the plague ended. The community that was there in 1753 was not the original community. It was a successor community, living in houses that had been emptied by plague and refilled. And then that community was displaced, and the close was sealed, and the Royal Exchange was built on top of it. The underground street has been accessible to guided tours since 23 under the management of the City of Edinburgh Council. It has been surveyed, documented, and partially excavated. What the surveys confirmed is that the close extends further than the currently accessible sections. Passages that were blocked or partially collapsed in the 18th century have not been cleared. Edinburgh's Old Town is built almost entirely on closes of this type. The Royal Mile sits on a ridge that drops sharply on both sides. The lower floors of dozens of medieval closes were incorporated into later foundations using the same method used at Mary King's. Some have been accessed. Most have not. The city of Edinburgh is built in significant part on its own sealed past. The rooms below the streets are not archaeological sites in the conventional sense. They are rooms, with floors, with walls, with the remaining contents of lives that were replaced, not cleared. The people who lived in Mary King's Close did not expect to be forgotten. No one who builds a life expects the city to grow over them. Every old European city that has expanded and rebuilt across the medieval period has done the same thing. The difference is whether anyone has yet found the floor. Downward from Edinburgh's sealed street, we go to Poland, where the people who could not come up chose instead to finish what they were building. Number 7. Wielsekcie, the cathedral that Salt built. The men who carved the chapel of St. Kinga in the Wielicka salt mine near Krakow did not expect to see daylight again. Salt miners in medieval Poland entered the mine as young men and in many cases did not surface alive. The work was done in total darkness with hand tools, in shafts that flooded without warning, in air that could become toxic from natural gas accumulation, at depths where a roof collapse meant burial without recovery. The medieval miners at Wielicka, who began serious extraction in the 13th century, understood their environment as a permanent one. They were not visitors underground. They lived there, so they built. The chapel of St. Kinga is 54 meters long, 15 meters wide, and 12 meters high. Every element of it, the floor, the walls, the altar, the chandeliers, the bas-relief panels depicting scenes from the New Testament, the life-size statues of the saints, is carved from salt. The chandeliers are carved from salt crystals dissolved in brine and recrystallized into forms that look, under lighting, like faceted glass. The Last Supper panel on the east wall is salt bas relief of sufficient detail that individual faces are distinguishable. The chandelier above the nave weighs over 1,000 kilograms. It is salt. The chapel was excavated over 3 centuries, from the late 14th century to the early 20th, primarily by miners working in their own time, after their formal shift labor was complete, in the belief that creating a sacred space underground would provide protection against the specific dangers of their work. Welitska is not a chapel in a mine. It is a cathedral in an underground complex that covers 9 levels, descending to a depth of 327 meters, containing over 300 chambers connected by over 240 kilometers of passage. The chapel is one of several. The mine contains a ballroom, carved and used for functions beginning in the 18th century, a sanatorium level used for respiratory treatment, and sculpted galleries depicting scenes from Polish national history, carved by miners who had no formal artistic training. UNESCO listed the mine as a World Heritage Site in 1978, among the first 12 sites on the inaugural list. The documentation of the mine is extensive. The physical evidence of what the miners built is unambiguous. The question that the site raises, and that no architectural or social history has fully answered, is what kind of civilization chooses to build monuments underground that it knows will never be seen by the world above. The miners at Welitska were not a religious community in isolation. They were working men with families, integrated into the commercial economy of medieval Poland. The salt they extracted was among the most economically significant commodities in medieval Europe. They were not building for posterity or for visitors. They were building for themselves, in a world they could not leave, in the only medium available to them. The chapel is still used for mass. Concerts are performed in the ballroom. The air, consistently saline, is measurably beneficial for respiratory conditions. About 1.5 million tourists visit per year. The miners who carved it are remembered by none of them specifically. No medieval miner at Welitska left a documented name attached to the work. What they left is 240 kilometers of carved salt and a cathedral in the dark, built by people who expected to die there. The next tunnel was not built for worship. It was built for a different kind of necessity, to move the dead without letting the living see them. Number 8. The Brno Plague Tunnels. The city beneath the city of the dead. Beneath the city of Brno, in the Czech Republic, there is a tunnel network that archaeologists describe as the most extensive intact medieval plague infrastructure in Europe. The tunnels do not run between buildings in any conventional sense. They run between the surface and specific subsurface destinations, mass burial chambers, ossuary crypts, and underground routes that allowed the dead to be transported from collection points in the streets to final burial sites without the bodies ever appearing above ground. The tunnels were expanded and reinforced during the plague outbreaks of the 14th and 17th centuries. The 14th century network, the Black Death period, represents the older layer. The 17th century expansion during the 30 Years' War and its associated epidemics added deeper chambers and extended the route network. The two layers are archaeologically distinguishable by the construction technique and the composition of the fill material. In the 14th century, Brno's population was between 10 and 15,000 people. The Black Death killed approximately 30 to 50% of European urban populations. In a city of that size, over a plague event of several months, the volume of dead exceeded any normal disposal infrastructure by an order of magnitude. The tunnels were a logistics solution. They allowed bodies to move through the city below the level of the living, reducing exposure and this is the detail the historical record specifically mentions, preserving the appearance of civic order above ground. The municipal records of Brno from the 14th century do not describe panic or abandonment. The city continued to function administratively through the worst of the outbreak. The tunnel system is part of the reason. Archaeologist Rudolf Prochaska and colleagues at Masaryk University have led surveys of the Brno underground since the 2000s. The known network covers over 6 kilometers. Sections that have been opened and documented show consistent construction, vaulted brick passages wide enough for a body on a stretcher, with occasional widened chambers at intersection points and ventilation shafts reaching the surface in specific, unmarked locations above. The ventilation design is deliberate and sophisticated. The shafts are positioned and angled to create passive air movement through the tunnels without requiring mechanical intervention. Some sections of the network are sealed and have not been opened in the modern period. They are sealed not by collapse, but by deliberate medieval blocking. The same construction technique observed in Prague. blocked passages built during the period of active use. What is behind the sealed sections has not been established. The decision to leave them sealed is partly preservation, partly structural caution, partly according to one survey report, because what has been found in the open sections has been sufficient to establish the network's scale and purpose, and the risks of structural disturbance to modern foundations above make full excavation prohibitively complex. The BRNO tunnels are not unique in concept. Medieval cities across Europe built subsurface infrastructure for the management of epidemic death. Most of it was destroyed in later centuries during modernization. Brno survives because the city's medieval core was built on geology that limited deep foundation work in later centuries, preserving the medieval layer below the modern construction. You are standing, in any medieval European city center, above some version of this. The difference is not whether it was built, the difference is whether the ground above it has been disturbed enough to find it. The next tunnel was not built for the dead. It was built to make the living question what was real. Number 9. The Oracle Tunnel of Baiae, the machine that manufactured the underworld. There is a tunnel near the Bay of Naples, carved through a hillside of volcanic rock, 180 meters long, built sometime before the 1st century BC, rediscovered by Robert Paget, a British amateur archaeologist, in 1962. It is not medieval, it is older, but it was used throughout the medieval period, its purpose unknown to the people who used it, its original design so precise that its effects are entirely intact today. The tunnel is acoustically engineered. The passage narrows and widens at specific intervals. The ceiling height changes at calculated points. A hot spring at the tunnel's lowest depth, below the water table, vents steam that reduces visibility to near zero within 30 meters of the entrance. The dimensions of the final chamber, a carved room at the tunnel's terminus, are proportioned such that any sound spoken inside the chamber returns to the speaker from 3 directions simultaneously, with a delay that makes the return sound appear to come from a different voice. You speak. You hear yourself replied to. The reply does not sound like you. Paget spent years mapping the tunnel after its rediscovery. His findings were published posthumously in the 1999 volume The Ancient Oracles at Baiae and The Oracle of the Dead, co-authored with Keith Jones. The technical acoustic analysis was later confirmed by independent acoustical engineering surveys. The effects described are not disputed. The question is whether they are accidental or designed. The tunnel is carved through volcanic tuff using tools appropriate to the late Roman Republican or early imperial period. The material is consistent across the structure, no signs of piecemeal extension or revision. This was built as a single project, to a single plan. The position of the steam vent is at the structural center of the acoustic design. A tunnel built for transit or for water access would not position the vent there. The hot spring access point makes the tunnel more dangerous and less useful for any conventional purpose. It makes the acoustic experience more complete. Paget's hypothesis, which has been seriously assessed and not refuted by subsequent acoustic analysis, is that the tunnel was built as a functional oracle site, a physical environment designed to produce the experience of communication with the dead. The Cumaean Sibyl, the most famous oracle of the ancient world, operated in the same geographical region, on the same volcanic hillside. Ancient texts describe an oracle at Baiae, involving an underground descent to the river of the dead. Virgil, in the Aeneid, placed the descent into the underworld in this exact location. The tunnel is the mechanism, the steam, the darkness, the narrowing passage, the acoustic effect at the terminus. These are the components of a machine that manufactured the phenomenology of the underworld for the people who were brought into it. The priests or operators who ran the oracle understood what the tunnel did. The visitors did not. Medieval pilgrimage routes through the Bay of Naples region passed near Baiae. The site was known in the medieval period as a place of supernatural significance. The specific mechanism of the acoustic effect was not understood. People entered the tunnel and experienced what it produced, without knowing that the experience was engineered. The tunnel is open to archaeological access. The hot spring still vents. The steam still fills the lower passage. The acoustic chamber still returns a voice from 3 directions. A visitor standing in the final room today hears what visitors heard 2,000 years ago. The same reply, from the same walls, in the same dark. The medieval people who passed through it were not wrong about what they heard. They were missing the engineering. If the Oracle Tunnel is the most deliberate underground deception on this list, The final entry is the most unsettling, because it is the most recent and the most domestic, and it raises the question that every tunnel on this list eventually approaches from a different angle. Number 10. The Hellfire Caves. The inversion beneath the altar. In 1748, Sir Francis Dashwood, a member of Parliament, a founding member of the Dilettante Society, and one of the most well-connected men in Georgian England, hired laborers from the village of West Wycombe, Buckinghamshire, to dig a tunnel into a chalk hill. The stated purpose was road improvement. The road needed chalk fill. The chalk was there. The project, which lasted until 1752, was therefore officially a quarrying operation. The tunnels extend a quarter of a mile into the hill. They are not quarry shafts. They are corridors, with named chambers, deliberate curves, carved alcoves, and a final inner chamber, called the Inner Temple, that sits directly beneath the Church of St. Lawrence on the hilltop above, positioned precisely below the church's altar, at the maximum possible depth, at the end of the longest possible passage from the entrance. The alignment is not approximate, it is surveyed. The inner temple is not roughly below the church, it is geometrically below the altar, at a depth that corresponds to the height of the church above it. The tunnel and the church form a vertical axis. The underground chamber mirrors the sacred space above it in its position, in deliberate inversion. Dashwood founded the Order of the Knights of St. Francis of Wycombe, commonly known as the Hellfire Club, in 1749, during the tunnel construction. The club's members included Benjamin Franklin, who visited West Wycombe and the tunnels in 1773 and 1774, John Wilkes, the political radical, the Earl of Sandwich, and most of the significant political figures of mid-18th century Britain. They met in the caves. The meetings were private. No minutes were kept. What happened in the inner temple has never been documented. The primary historical sources are satirical pamphlets published by opponents of the members, which described rituals involving mock religious ceremony, political discussion beyond what could be safely held in public, and entertainment that the pamphlets characterized as scandalous. The satirical framing makes the factual content unverifiable. The membership is not in dispute. The meetings are not in dispute. The content is not recorded. What is archaeologically clear is the construction. The chalk of the Hellfire Caves is still damp. The geology of the hill means the tunnels remain at a consistent humidity. The carved niches in the passage walls are consistent with alcoves for holding candles or lanterns at regular intervals along a route designed for navigation. The geometry of the inner temple, at 14 feet in diameter, corresponds to a proportion that appears in other designed ceremonial spaces. These measurements are not accidental products of quarrying, they are designed dimensions. The caves are open to the public. The inner temple is the final chamber of the visitor route, and the church is visible on the hilltop directly above when you exit the tunnel entrance. The vertical relationship between the two spaces is apparent to anyone who observes the site's geography. The design intent is the subject of ongoing historical debate. The physical reality of the alignment is not. The chalk is cold, the geometry is deliberate, and the relationship between the space above the ground and the space below it, one consecrated, one inverted, is the clearest statement this list makes about why the medieval and early modern world dug downward with such ambition and such secrecy. It is not because they needed storage. It is not because they needed escape routes. It is because they understood something that above-ground civilization enforces. The surface is public, visible, recorded, and controlled. What is beneath the surface is none of those things. The medieval underground is not the basement of history. It is a second history, running in parallel to the first, built in the same stone, by the same hands, at the same time, intended to remain unknown. 700 Erdstall tunnels with no recorded purpose, an underground city used in 4 wars and then forgotten, a Crusader military secret preserved perfectly beneath a woman's kitchen floor, a capital city built on top of itself, still finding new voids, a double helix well whose engineering mathematics wouldn't be formalized for 2 centuries, a street sealed beneath an exchange, furniture still in the rooms, a cathedral in salt built by men who expected to die underground, a plague logistics network that kept a city functional by moving the dead invisibly, an acoustic machine designed to simulate the voice of the dead, a chamber positioned precisely below an altar, its purpose deliberately unrecorded. Every old city in Europe is built on this principle. The surface was always the visible story. The underground was always the real one. And the question that none of these 10 sites answers, because none of them can, is how much of the real one has not yet been found.